Hi guys, welcome to Commercial Law Tutorials, Law of Lease. We have already looked at the definition, requirements and the characteristics. We also looked at the types of lease agreements we have. Today we are moving on to lesson number 3, duties of landlord and those of the tenant. In this lesson, first of all, we are going to look at the duties of the landlord, then the duties of the tenant, landlord's tacit hypothec, and then forfeiture clause. And at the end of the lesson, I'll give you popular exam questions relating to this lesson. What are the duties of the landlord? The landlord, first of all, have to deliver use and occupation of property to the tenant for the tenant to use and to enjoy. We are saying that the landlord must deliver everything necessary according to the terms of their contract for the tenant to use and enjoy the property that is under lease. For instance, remotes, they should also be delivered if the property needs remotes to be controlled. The landlord has also the duty to maintain the property in a good order and condition for the duration of the lease agreement. Then the other duty is to guarantee quiet enjoyment. The landlord should ensure that the tenants have undisturbed use and enjoyment of the property that is under lease, unless for necessary repairs that are done by the landlord. The landlord should also warrant the tenant against eviction from any third party, unless when the tenant knew of the third party better title on the property, for instance, in a sublease. Then the landlord should also compensate the tenant for damages caused by defects where landlord knew about the defect on the property but failed to tell the tenant, or due to the landlord's profession. For instance, if the landlord is a builder or an electrician, he ought to have known about it. So in this case, the landlord has to also compensate the tenant for the damages caused by the defects. And also, where there is a warrant that the property was in good condition, the landlord has the duty to compensate the tenant also. Then to pay the property taxes on the property, for instance, those imposed by municipality, unless otherwise, if in the lease it was agreed that the tenant is responsible for rents and taxes accruing on that property during the lease period, the landlord, in every case, unless it is mentioned in their lease agreement otherwise, the landlord has got the duty to pay all the property taxes on that property during the term of the lease. Then to also compensate the tenant for any necessary improvements that are made by the tenant on the property for the protection and preservation of the property. Those were the duties of the landlord. Let us look at the duties of the tenant. What is required from the tenant? The tenant should pay the agreed rent to the landlord on the agreed date using the agreed method of payment. He should also use and maintain property in a proper way. The tenant should take proper care of the property and never use it for any other purpose than that for which it was leased. For instance, for housing purposes, the tenant should not turn the house into a club. It should be used for housing purposes only. Then landlord should also return the property to the landlord after lease agreement ends in the same good order and condition as it was when he received that property, except for reasonable wear and tear though. Should vacate the property on termination of the lease agreement. Let us now look at the landlord's tacit hypothec, as we have already looked at the duties of both the landlord and the tenant. The hypothec allows the landlord to sell tenant movable goods which are on the leased premises. If the tenant fails to pay the rent, he can recover all the accrued rent. This ensures that the tenant pays rent as agreed for the period he uses the landlord's property. It is a form of real security. Landlord gets an interdict restraining the removal or sale of the goods on the leased property pending an action for rent or an order for their attachment by the court. That is the landlord's tacit hypothec. Let us now look at forfeiture clause. Forfeiture clause gives a landlord the right to terminate lease agreement and take possession of property under lease if tenant is in breach of their obligation. A forfeiture clause is a common clause in the commercial leases and can allow the landlord to terminate lease where there is a breach of any term in their contract that they have agreed on. For instance, rent arrears and obligations to repair. Let us now look at the questions. What are the obligations of the landlord and the tenant in a lease? That was all I had for you. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and to like. Also remember to click on the notification bell so that you can be notified every time I post a new video.